Situated in the north of Bavaria, Rothenburg ob der Tauber is one of the most well-preserved medieval towns in all of Germany. This location has been famed all over the world through movies and paintings, and is known as Little Square, by far the most famous spot in Rothenburg, and photographed many times by visitors. However, the town of Rothenburg itself has roots reaching all the way back to the 10th century. It is a city with a history of over 1,000 years, plagued by wars, conflicts, sieges, and natural disasters. Every stone of these cobble roads is filled with history. Colorful houses with ancient half-timbered architecture encompasses every street. This is one of the few towns in Germany that still holds fully intact walls, which stretch across 1.5 miles to completely surround it. Walls such as this carried a myriad of purposes in the Middle Ages, most obviously for protection against enemy forces, but also for tax purposes, such as controlling which people and what goods could enter through the gates. Its early history began with the founding of Detwang in 970, 2 kilometers from present-day Rothenburg, a parish of the Tauber Valley and today a suburb of Rothenburg. Here can be found the Church of St. Peter and Paul, which is the parent church of the future St. James Church, found in Rothenburg itself. The name Rothenburg ob der Tauber, translating to Red Castle above Tauber, is highly significant. Tauber refers to a river within the Tauber Valley, whereby a castle was constructed high above around the 11th century by the Counts of Comberg-Rothenburg, marking the final position of the future town. The latest successor of the Comberg-Rothenburg properties, Conrad III, many years later built the Staffer Castle, close to the old castle, after acquiring the site. The city of Rothenburg was founded during the construction of this castle, and it would not be long before it received city rights and its first fortification. The Staffer Castle did, however, collapse in an earthquake 1356, and so the goal henceforth was to protect the city, so that attackers could not invade from the west. Since it was too late to save the collapsed castle, Emperor Charles IV allowed the stones to be used for other construction, such as the castle gate and its castle garden. Castle garden is misleading, because the 12th century castle had no garden. Only the Blasius Chapel still stands from the original castle. It now serves as a memorial to the fallen of the 2 world wars, and remains one of the oldest buildings in Rothenburg. The city saw incredible growth in the 13th century, such as the construction of its walls and towers. During this period of growth was also laid the foundation of a new town hall, to be built in a new location after the previous one had burnt down entirely. Initially, this new hall had been built in the early Gothic type of architecture, a style common across Europe during these times. However, centuries later this town hall too was overcome with fire, destroying many parts of it. Yet instead of rebuilding those parts as they were instead rebuilt in the new Renaissance style, making the front and back of the building heavily different from each other. This also has one of the few towers in the city that visitors are still allowed to climb. At the foundation of the previous town hall was built the Meat and Dance House. This curious name comes from the upper floor housing dancing and celebrations in older times. Today, the Rothenburg Künstlerbund Art Collective has its home in the basement here, with a display of 200 of its members' works. The most important event of the 1200s occurred in 1274. Rothenburg was granted the status of a free imperial city, a status granted only to few towns during the Middle Ages. Unlike many towns of the time, which were simply territorial cities and under the fealty of a local lord, such as a duke or prince-bishop or so forth, free imperial cities were under direct protection of the Holy Roman Emperor and self-governing, which provided Rothenburg a great degree of autonomy. This made Rothenburg play an important part in politics of the region, as it managed to retain this status of a free imperial city all the way to the 19th century, when it became part of the Kingdom of Bavaria. This long standing was in no small part due to its position, which it benefited from greatly. The base of the Tauber Valley was a notable international trade route, along which numerous medieval cities were built, connecting Italy with important German places such as Rhineland, Würzburg, and Augsburg. Rothenburg's standing eventually gave it access to redirecting this important trade route directly into the town, rather than following its current way along the river. This by means of a remarkable double bridge still found within the town, albeit a reconstruction of it. This fueled business like never before, letting wool be traded all the way to Como, Italy. Wool was Rothenburg's primary export, and is something deeply entangled with the Shepherd's Dance, a festival and historical dance to be witnessed at multiple points throughout the year by visitors. Furthermore, housed today within the gatehouse of St. Wolfgang's Church lies the Shepherd's Dance Museum, wherein there are exhibits based around the shepherd, sheep, and dance, as well as the wool trade of Rothenburg through the years. Also, within the church itself, which had been erected in the late 1400s by the Shepherds Guild, are other artistic works, such as an altar dedicated to Wolfgang himself, the patron saint who saw through the protection of shepherds and their flocks. Wool was not the only important trade item of the city though, as wine production from the sunny southern slopes was also a strong suit, due to the beverage's popularity, of which the taxes contributed greatly to the city's economy. Rothenburg also had what was said to be the largest mill in southern Germany at one point in time. The mill that, instead of being powered by water like they usually were, was powered by 16 horses, a building now serving as a youth hostel. Rothenburg kept close ties to the imperial court, receiving even the emperor himself multiple times. Importantly too is that it became a strong ally of other free imperial cities such as itself, opposing the interests of regional nobility by joining with the Swabian League of Cities, an association with the goal of maintaining the freedom granted to its members. Lords of the Middle Ages often sought to profit from prosperous cities such as Rothenburg, something these alliances aided in avoiding. Rothenburg's politics were not without conflict, as the city saw a multitude of disputes throughout the years, such as its partaking in the Peasants' War of the 16th century, but also in 1405, a dispute between the city council and Burgrave John III of Nuremberg, a conflict deeply tied to the story and downfall of Heinrich Toppler, a member of the inner council of the city, who was repeatedly elected mayor. Under his leadership, the city acquired numerous castles and estates, and saw to the strengthening and expansion of the city's fortifications. He came from a family of farmers who made a small fortune in Rothenburg by trading livestock, and was one of the richest citizens of Rothenburg, acquiring also extensive property of his own, such as his famous residential tower, the Toppler Castle, resembling a medieval tower. Due to the dispute with the Burgrave, the Knights of Franconia were called together in a war against Rothenburg. The city was left to defend itself against an army of more than 10,000 men. Remarkably, the city held off all attacks due to its position and excellent system of defense. An example of this is the Gate to Herngas, the castle gate, whereupon there is a matriculation, or murder hall, in the shape of a mask, which was used to pour hot tar onto attackers. This was paired with a small door within the gate itself, allowing only a single person to enter at a time. By October 1407, the Burgrave of Nuremberg and the Bishop of Würzburg, who led the attack, ran out of financial means to sustain the war. But Toppler had made the grave mistake during the war of turning to the dethroned King Wenzel. This was seen as an act of treason and would lead to his downfall, costing him the alliance of his fellow councilmen and ultimately his life, as he was imprisoned in the state dungeon and eventually put to death. The details of his death are a mystery, but the most likely speculations are that he died of beheading, or having been left to die of thirst. The dungeon is found beneath the town hall and is also a museum these days, showcasing life as it was for the prisoners back then, with full-size figures and recreations of a writing room and guardroom from the period. Interestingly, the pages of the year 1408 are missing from the Rothenburg town books, while it was meticulously kept in the years before and after. Unfortunately, some conflicts were far more devastating, and even led to internal conflicts within the town itself, and shaping the very structure of it. Most notably when the city council was prompted to raise taxes, particularly on wine, due to a number of costly conflicts in the 1440s. The middle class rebelled at this, and on the night of July 11th, 1451, leaders of the revolt broke into the houses of several councilmen, taking them prisoner in the city hall and forcing them into a compromise. 12 new members were added to the inner city council, some of which represented the leading trade guilds of the city. But it did not last long. The old government was quickly voted to be restored their complete power. Soon enough, the constitution was reinstated, now with the forbidding of guilds to play a political role in the city henceforward. And so the council, along with various religious institutions, were thereafter the primary political entities within Rothenburg. As it was in the Middle Ages, churches served several important functions. Beyond the practice of faith and promulgating the Christian religion, measuring time and providing a space for public gatherings were also of importance. The parish church especially was a core public space in the medieval town, where people from all stages of life most frequently gathered as a community. Collections, festivals, and organized ceremonies like baptism, marriages, and funerals helped create a sense of responsibility and belonging in the community. Rothenburg only ever had one parish, unlike some other medieval cities which grew to incorporate several, making the parish church of St. James the most significant sacred space in the city. This ancient church, built over the course of 174 years, is quite a remarkable one. It has 600-year-old stained glass windows and is filled with collections of impressive art objects, and even houses one of the largest organs in Bavaria, with free concerts performed all year presently. Its fame, in many ways, exceeds the city of Rothenburg itself, as this is a pilgrimage destination for people from all over. The aforementioned art pieces display an important reason to travel all the way there, and cannot go without mentioning. Around 2.5 million tourists visit Rothenburg op der Tauber every year. But this is not only for the medieval city itself. Many come specifically to see the art of Tilman Riemenschneider, recognized now as one of the greatest late medieval and early Renaissance artists. Tilman was a sculptor and woodcarver during the 15th and 16th centuries, predominantly in his hometown of Würzburg. He was a renowned master craftsman and one of the most famous artists of the late Gothic period, producing works with his workshop for many other German cities, even stretching as far as Belgium. The Church of St. James holds one of his most famed pieces, the Altar of Holy Blood. He was summoned to Rothenburg to create this intricate work, along with multiple other retables, and it took 4 years to finish with the help of multiple assistants and other people such as metal workers. Although it may be considered small by today's standards, in medieval times Rothenburg would have been a town of incredible size. Most cities within Germany would have had a population of no more than 1,000 people, whereas Rothenburg numbered between 5,000 and 7,000, making it one of the largest of its time. Not to mention the breadth of its territory, which rivaled nearly every other town in the country besides Ulm and Strasbourg. However, despite Rothenburg's great status as a free imperial city and its importance in trade and politics, poverty eventually overcame it during the 30 Years' War, a terrible yet pivotal conflict between Catholics and Protestants during the 17th century that led to the deaths of millions, of which Rothenburg did not escape. Johann Zerklaas, Count of Tilly, a field marshal of the Catholic League, sought to station his 40,000 troops within Rothenburg. Rothenburg was, however, a town of Protestant belief at this time, and so the city's council and senators denied General Tilly's request, choosing instead to defend the town. The town was of heavy fortification and was even able to withstand the first siege, but when parts of the city wall were destroyed with gunpowder, Tilly and his men were able to enter through the Gallows Gate, the highest point of Rothenburg. This gate had for many years been exposed to attacks due to its geographical position, and thus Tilly was able to infiltrate the city, giving the people of Rothenburg no choice but to surrender. Tilly's troops had lost 300 soldiers in the conflict, and so they took revenge by plundering the city, and only after 3 months did they depart, leaving the town in poverty. Ironically, this is one of the very reasons the town is as well preserved today as it is. Due to the abandonment of Rothenburg in such a poor and empty state, paired with a plague outbreak killing many more of its inhabitants, the town ceased to see further growth, and faded into insignificance for more than 2 centuries, and so it became trapped in the 17th century state. The story of General Tilly and the 30 Years' War is also the source of a legend famous and celebrated in Rothenburg to this day, known as the Master Dwarf legend. The legend goes as such that when Tilly was to burn down Rothenburg and condemn the councilmen to death, they tried to sway him with a tankard of more than 3 liters of Franconian wine. Amused, Tilly proposed that if one of the councillors managed to empty the entire tankard in a single draught, the town and its citizens would be spared. George Nusch, the mayor at the time, was the first man brave enough to attempt the challenge, and even succeeded. Surprisingly, Tilly kept to his word and soon left the town. It is not known whether or not this tale is true, as the first recount of it is from more than a century after the supposed events. But nonetheless, for more than a century it has been celebrated every single year during several festive events through a theatre play in the town hall, written by the local poet Adam Herber in the late 1800s. Initially, this play was limited to the yearly event known as the 4-day Whitsun Festival. The Whitsun Festival, also known as Pentecost, is a striking spectacle of color, music and food. A market of handcrafted wares is set up in the church square, and a massive parade wanders through the historic streets, led by a marching band, accompanied by knights and mercenaries, wagons and horses and many more. As of more recent times, this reenactment has been extended to multiple other points in the year, such as the September Imperial Town Festival, where Rothenburg becomes a huge medieval camp, with many different groups from Rothenburg's history coming together. The legend can't be experienced merely during these events, however. After the clock of the Councillor's Tavern strikes 10 every morning, every hour of the day to 10 PM, at the front of the building, shutters are opened depicting Mayor Nusch and General Tilly during the events of the Master Dwarf. The Councillor's Tavern, as the name suggests, once permitted entry only to the councillors of Rothenburg. Today it is commonly the first stop for any visitors arriving in town, and houses the Tourist Information Center. There are a myriad of other festivals in the city as well throughout the year, like the Wine Festival, the Fairy Tale Magic Week, and the Christmas Market. Also, during Easter times, the Spring Awakening is celebrated, and sees restaurants offering seasonal specialities. The city is decorated with lots of vibrant, colorful decorations and Easter eggs, especially the fountains throughout the city, such as the Röde Fountain, one of the around 40 wells built here during the Middle Ages. The reason for this large number of wells is due to the geographical location of the city, making it difficult to provide sufficient water permanently to the population, and various fountains had water transferred by the height difference from well to well. Within 1594, a water pipe that supplied the town's fountains via the tower of the Klingen Gate was laid. A highly practical tower, serving both as a water tower and fortification. It is connected to the church of Saint Wolfgang by a shared wall, from inside which defenders could climb into the tower, letting them fire onto attackers were they to make it onto the ramparts. There used to be a total of 4 entrances that you had to pass through until you got into the city from Tauber Valley. There are many other museums too, like the Shepherd's Dance Museum and the State Dungeon. The German Christmas Museum, which surprisingly, despite its name, is open at all times of year, even summertime, showcasing how Christmas was enjoyed in Germany throughout the ages, with decorations and figures all over with an enchanting atmosphere. Similarly, there is the Medieval Town Museum housed on the site of an old Dominican convent, which brings one on a tour through Rothenburg itself through the times, and the different diverse cultures within. There's also a number of paintings by Martinus Swartz and Arthur Wars, and even a tracing of the history of European weaponry from the Stone Age to the 19th century by the Baumann Foundation, including the guns used by Marie Antoinette and Frederick the Great. The convent garden can also be found by the former monastery, where it is likely that nuns grew a medical herb garden using the knowledge of Hildegard of Bingen, and today 50 different herbs are grown there. Similarly to the State Dungeon, the Museum of Medieval Crime displays how law was administered across 1,000 years, witchcraft and witch hunting, torture methods, and court cases. And not least of all, the Old Craftsman's House, standing right in the center of the old town, a highly preserved building and the setting for many artisan businesses through the years, giving a glimpse into the lives of craftsmen. This house was later owned by a hermit who carefully preserved all its features, keeping every floor as it was. How did the town fare with the World War then? Before that, it is important to note that in the 19th century, the town was rediscovered by artists, writers and academics and shown to the world as a striking example of old German medieval architecture, turning it into a popular tourist destination, which would play a huge part for its economy and help its recovery from its state of poverty. Its citizens and government thus, luckily, realized the importance of how well preserved the town was, and so laws were created to prevent anyone from making changes to their house, and the more modern parts of the town were developed outside the walls instead. World War II left around 40% of the town damaged, but while still significant, this is a small number compared to many German towns, and luckily, the center of the town was left largely unscathed. How then did Rothenburg survive so much damage, and how was it spared further destruction afterwards? This was in part due to the bombing occurring on an overcast day, and so the entirety was not visible from air. But later on, John MacLeod, an American Assistant Secretary of War, was able to negotiate for the city to be spared. MacLeod had a certain fondness of Rothenburg and was aware of its importance due to his mother having visited before and bringing home a painting of it. He ordered the army general not to use artillery in taking the city, and so when the US Army arrived at the town, with the help of a translator, it was negotiated that Rothenburg would be spared if the Germans did not defend it. MacLeod was thus awarded and bestowed the title of Honorary Citizen of Rothenburg. Hard work was then put into rebuilding the city. With its fame, Rothenburg is no stranger to the rest of the world. Along the city wall, there are engravings of names of people from all across the world, all of whom bought a portion of the wall in order to help rebuild the city. The goal was not entirely to rebuild it exactly as it was, but rather to maintain the distinctive style of its buildings. A clear example of this is the Old Forge. This was reconstructed 6 years after the war and used to be only a barn, but is now instead one of the most remarkable buildings in the town. While it retains some of its old appearance, the new building is even more remarkable, with a much greater attention to detail. This was still active as a smithy for over 20 years after the war by the town-famous smith George Gallac, who made the coat of arms seen at the front, until it eventually went to private hands. Today there is a night watchman's tour, where you are led through the town and told many stories from its history, all the way from daily life during the Middle Ages to invasions and countless important wars and events. There are also many books about Rothenburg, such as Riemenschneider in Rothenburg. As is the case with many German towns, its history is well documented in great detail. History can so easily be lost and forgotten, which makes this little gem of a town just that much more special. Rothenburg ob der Tauber has weathered the passage of time, and will likely continue to do so long after we're gone too.